When Miriam Yoder's twin daughters sealed her death sentence in the eyes of her Amish community, she was abandoned beneath a prairie oak to die with shame as her only companion. But as the Nebraska sun scorched the life from her body in 1879, hoofbeats approached through the golden grass, and the Lakota warrior who dismounted would offer her a choice that would shatter everything she believed about family, faith, and where she truly belonged. Could a cast-out Amish mother and a grieving Sioux warrior find salvation in each other's broken worlds? Prairie grass whispered secrets that Miriam Yoder would never tell her babies. The August heat of 1879 pressed down on Nebraska like a heavy blanket, making everything shimmer and dance. Miriam lay beneath the old oak tree at the edge of New Hope settlement, holding two tiny bundles against her chest. Her plain gray dress stuck to her skin with sweat and fear. The morning had started like any other Sunday. Church bells rang across the settlement, calling families to worship. But when Elder Stoltzfus saw Miriam's twin daughters for the first time, his face turned white as fresh snow. "Twins," he had whispered, backing away like she carried poison. God's punishment for hidden sin. The other women pulled their children closer. Mrs. Miller, who had helped birth the babies just 3 days before, wouldn't even look at Miriam's face. The twins were perfect. 10 tiny fingers each, 10 tiny toes each, lungs strong enough to fill the whole world with their cries. But perfection meant nothing when fear ruled hearts. "Pack your things," Elder Stoltzfus had ordered. "You cannot stay among God's faithful people." Miriam's mother stood in the church doorway, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. But she said nothing. Speaking up would mean losing her place in the community too. In the Amish world, being cast out was worse than death. So Miriam walked. She carried her babies and a small bundle of clothes, following the dusty road until it became a path, then just trampled grass. Her legs shook with every step. The babies needed milk, but her body was failing. She had eaten nothing since yesterday morning. The oak tree offered the only shade for miles. Miriam collapsed beneath its twisted branches, feeling bark scrape against her back. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out like it was morning. The sound made her shiver despite the heat. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her daughters. Hope, that's what she had named the first one. Faith came second, fighting her way into the world with tiny fists already swinging. "Mama tried to keep you safe." The babies stirred against her, making soft sounds that broke her heart. They trusted her completely. They didn't know their mother was dying, didn't understand that the world had already decided they were worth nothing. Miriam closed her eyes and listened to the endless wind. It sounded like voices, maybe angels, maybe just her mind playing tricks. The sun beat down harder, turning the inside of her eyelids red as blood. Her lips cracked. Her throat felt like sand. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time moved strangely when death came calling. The babies cried less now, saving their strength. Miriam's milk had nearly dried up. Soon, very soon, all 3 of them would join the angels. But the wind carried something new, a sound that didn't belong to the empty prairie. Hoofbeats, steady and strong, coming closer. A painted horse emerged from the heat waves like something from a dream. Its rider sat tall and straight, dark hair braided with feathers that caught the dying sunlight. Miriam had never seen a Lakota warrior up close, but she knew what he was. The Amish spoke of his people in hushed, frightened voices. Joseph Tuhawk saw the woman and babies from 100 yards away. His horse, Stormrunner, snorted and stamped, sensing something wrong. Joseph had been tracking a wounded deer when he spotted the still figures beneath the oak tree. Now the deer was forgotten. He dismounted slowly, hands open and empty. The white woman's eyes were closed, but he could see her chest rising and falling in short, quick breaths. The babies lay against her like sleeping birds. All 3 were close to death. Anyone could see that. "Water," the woman whispered, without opening her eyes. The word came out in German first, then broken English. "Please, babies." Joseph reached for the buffalo horn canteen on his belt. His own people were camped just 5 miles north, but this woman and her children would die long before he could bring help. He knelt beside her, lifting her head gently. "Drink," he said in careful English. His voice was deeper than Miriam expected. Warmer. Small sips. The water tasted like life itself. Miriam's eyes fluttered open, meeting his dark gaze. She had expected cruelty, That's what the elders taught about his people. Instead, she saw something that looked like kindness. Joseph studied the babies with gentle hands. His sister Morning Star had borne children. He knew what healthy babies looked like. These two were thin but strong. They would live if someone cared for them properly. "Why are you alone?" he asked, settling back on his heels. Miriam tried to sit up straighter. "My people," they said the twins were cursed. "Bad luck." Her English came slowly, mixed with German words she couldn't translate. Joseph frowned. In his tribe, twins were considered blessed. Twice the joy, twice the strength for the family. "Your people are fools." The simple words hit Miriam like a lightning bolt. No one had ever questioned the elders' wisdom before. In her world, what the church decided was final, unchangeable as stone. But this stranger looked at her daughters and saw blessings instead of curses. "I am Joseph Two Hawks," he said, beginning to gather dry grass. "I will make shelter." "Miriam," she replied, watching him work with quick, sure movements. "These are hope and faith." Joseph smiled for the first time, a real smile that reached his eyes. Good names. Strong names. He began weaving the grass into a small shelter that would block the worst of the sun. "My daughter was called Little Moon. She died last winter when sickness came to our camp." The sadness in his voice made Miriam's heart ache. This man knew loss the same way she did. Maybe that's why he stopped to help instead of riding past like most people would. As evening shadows stretched across the prairie, Joseph built a small fire. The smoke would keep insects away and give them light when darkness fell. He worked without speaking, but Miriam felt safer than she had in days. "Tomorrow I bring food," Joseph said when the stars came out. "Medicine for strength." But as he mounted Stormrunner and rode into the darkness, neither of them saw the distant campfire where 3 men in blue uniforms planned their patrol route for the coming week. Joseph's hunting knife sliced through the morning air, striking the rabbit with deadly aim. Miriam watched from her makeshift shelter as he skinned the animal with swift, practiced movements. 2 weeks had passed since he'd found her dying beneath the oak tree, and still she wondered why this Lakota warrior risked everything to keep 3 strangers alive. "You hunt differently than our men," Miriam said, adjusting baby Hope against her shoulder. The infant had grown stronger, no longer the tiny, struggling creature she'd been when cast out from New Hope. Joseph looked up, blood staining his weathered hands. "How do Amish men hunt?" "They don't." Miriam's laugh held no humor. "We buy meat from English traders. My people believe hunting is too violent for godly men." The warrior's dark eyes studied her face. "Yet they cast out a mother and her babies to starve. Which is more violent?" The question hit harder than any fist. Miriam had asked herself the same thing during endless prairie nights, listening to coyotes howl while her daughters slept peacefully in Joseph's hand-woven grass cradle. Faith stirred in her arms, tiny fingers grasping at sunlight filtering through their shelter. "My sister had twins once," Joseph continued, building up their cooking fire. The entire village celebrated. 2 children born together means double blessing from the Great Spirit. Miriam's throat tightened. Elder Stoltzfus said twins were punishment. That I must have sinned terribly for God to burden me so. Joseph's jaw hardened. Your elder was a fool. As meat cooked over flames, Joseph taught Miriam to weave prairie grass into watertight baskets. Her clumsy fingers struggled with the technique while he moved with fluid grace, creating beautiful patterns that seemed to flow like water. "Where did you learn this?" she asked. "My grandmother. She said idle hands make troubled hearts." Joseph paused, watching Faith grab at dancing shadows. "My wife used to weave, made the most beautiful blankets in our village." "What happened to her?" Joseph's hands stilled. "Soldiers brought sickness to our winter camp. Spotted fever. Took my daughter first. Then my wife tried to follow her to the spirit world." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Sometimes I think she succeeded." Miriam saw pain carved deep in his features, understanding flooding through her. They were both outcasts in their own ways. She rejected by her people, he haunted by unbearable loss. "That's why you help us," she said softly. "Perhaps," Joseph resumed weaving, his movements mechanical now. "Or perhaps the Spirit sent you to teach this old warrior something new." As evening approached, Joseph gathered his weapons and prepared to leave. He always departed before full darkness, returning to whatever camp or shelter he called home. Miriam had never asked where he went, respecting the boundary he'd drawn around his private grief. "Joseph," she called as he mounted his painted horse. "Tomorrow, could you teach me to hunt?" He turned, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "Amish women don't hunt." Miriam looked down at her daughters, then back at the endless prairie stretching toward horizons she'd never imagined crossing. Maybe this Amish woman does. Thunder rolled across the Nebraska grassland like war drums, making Miriam's horse dance nervously beneath her. She gripped the reins tighter, still amazed that she was riding at all. 3 weeks ago, she'd never touched a horse. Now she sat astride the gentle mare Joseph had traded for, following ancient buffalo trails toward his people's territory. "Storm's coming fast," Joseph called over the rising wind. He rode ahead, as always, his keen eyes scanning the horizon for dangers Miriam couldn't even imagine. "We need shelter." The twins rode secure in their cradle board, the ingenious carrier Joseph had crafted from bent willow branches and soft deer hide. Hope and Faith seemed to love traveling, their bright eyes taking in every new sight and sound. Sometimes Miriam wondered if her daughters sensed they were heading toward freedom instead of running from shame. Joseph pointed toward a dark line cutting across the prairie. "Creek bed ahead. Good place to wait out the weather." As they descended into the shallow valley, Miriam marveled at how different this landscape felt from the neat, ordered farms of New Hope. Here, wildflowers bloomed in riotous colors: purple blazing star, yellow sunflowers, white prairie roses that perfumed the air with sweetness. Everything grew wild and free, exactly as the Great Spirit intended. They found shelter in a grove of cottonwood trees, whose broad leaves whispered secrets in languages older than memory. Joseph quickly built a lean-to from fallen branches, while Miriam nursed the babies, both of them working with the easy cooperation they developed over weeks of shared survival. "How much farther to your village?" Miriam asked as rain began pattering on leaves above. 3 days, maybe 4 if weather stays bad." Joseph fed dry grass to their small fire, coaxing it to life despite the dampness. "My uncle leads our band. Good man, but suspicious of outsiders." Miriam's stomach clenched. "What if he doesn't want us there?" "Then we go somewhere else." Joseph's tone was matter-of-fact, as if starting over held no fear for him. "Plains are big. Always room for people willing to work hard." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the creek in stark white brilliance. In that brief moment, Miriam saw her reflection in the dark water wind-burned face, sun-bleached hair braided in the practical style Joseph had taught her, dressed in buckskin clothes he'd sewn to replace her torn Amish dress. She barely recognized the woman staring back. "I've been thinking about names," she said suddenly. Joseph looked up from sharpening his hunting knife. "Names? For the girls. You said hope would be whoop in your language. Faith would be wawawala." The Lakota words felt strange on her tongue, but beautiful too. Maybe they should choose which names to keep when they're older. Joseph smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Wise, mother. Children should have choices their parents never had." As rain drummed harder on their shelter, Joseph told stories to pass the time. He spoke of Iktamai, the spider trickster, of White Buffalo Calf Woman who brought sacred ceremonies to the people, of brave warriors and clever women who outwitted enemies through wit instead of weapons. The babies listened with solemn attention, as if understanding every word. "Your stories are different from Bible stories," Miriam observed. "How so?" "In Bible stories, people get punished for asking questions or wanting more than they have. In your stories, curiosity and courage get rewarded." Joseph nodded thoughtfully. "Different peoples, different wisdom. Maybe your daughters will learn from both." When morning came clear and bright, they continued north through grass still heavy with dew. Miriam found herself looking forward instead of backward for the first time since the twins' birth, wondering what new world waited beyond the next hill. A cloud of dust rose from the horizon like a brown snake sliding across the golden grass. Joseph's hand moved to the knife on his belt as he counted the dark shapes moving toward them, 6 riders wearing blue uniforms that meant trouble for any Indian caught on the wrong side of the territory line. Miriam felt her heart pound as she clutched the twins closer to her chest. The babies sensed danger and began to fuss, their tiny cries carrying across the empty prairie like warning bells. She had heard stories from the other Amish women about cavalry soldiers who shot first and asked questions later. "Get down low," Joseph whispered. pulling his horse behind a small hill. Maybe they will pass by without seeing us. But Lieutenant William Carver had eyes like a hawk hunting mice. He spotted them from half a mile away and spurred his horse forward, his men following in a line that kicked up more dust with each thundering step. The sound grew louder until it felt like the whole earth was shaking. Carver pulled up his horse so hard it reared on its back legs. His face was red from the sun and mean from years of fighting Indians across 3 different states. A long scar ran down his cheek from a knife fight in Kansas, and his blue eyes held no kindness at all. "Well, looky here, boys," he called to his soldiers. "Got ourselves a redskin and his woman playing house on government land." Joseph stood tall and straight, showing no fear even though 6 rifles were now pointed at his chest. "We travel in peace. We harm no one." "Peace?" Carver laughed like a coyote howling at the moon. "The only peace you savages understand comes from the end of a rope." Miriam's mouth went dry as sand. She had never seen such hate in a white man's eyes before. Even Elder Stoltzfus, who had cast her out for having twins, had never looked at her like she was something to be stepped on and crushed. The twins began crying louder, their voices mixing with the snorting of horses and the creak of leather saddles. One of the younger soldiers, barely old enough to grow whiskers, looked uncomfortable as he stared at the babies. "Sir," the young soldier said quietly, "maybe we should just let them go. They got little ones and all." Carver turned on him like a snake striking. "Private Henderson, when I want your opinion about Indian lovers, I'll ask for it. Until then, keep your mouth shut." Joseph took a step forward, putting himself between the soldiers and Miriam. "The woman and children have done nothing wrong. If you have anger, take it out on me." "Oh, I plan to," Carver said, pulling his pistol from its holster. The metal gleamed in the afternoon sun, like a piece of cold lightning. "But first, I want to know what kind of decent white woman would take up with a savage like you." Miriam felt something change inside her chest, like a door slamming shut on her old life, and another one creaking open. She stood up slowly, still holding the twins, and looked straight into Carver's cruel eyes. "I am Miriam Yoder," she said in a voice that surprised her with its strength. "And this man saved my life when my own people left me to die." The words hung in the hot air like smoke from a campfire, and everyone went quiet except for the babies and the sound of wind moving through the grass. Carver's face twisted into something uglier than before, like he had just bit into a piece of rotten meat. "Yoder? I know that name. You're one of them religious folk from New Hope settlement." He spit brown tobacco juice into the dirt. "What did you do, girl? Steal from the church collection box?" "I gave birth to twin daughters," Miriam said, lifting her chin high. "My people believe twins bring bad luck." The lieutenant threw back his head and laughed so hard his horse pranced sideways. "Bad luck? Hell, girl, laying with a redskin is about the worst luck you can get. But don't worry, we'll fix that problem right now." He raised his pistol toward Joseph's head, and Miriam saw death coming like a storm cloud rolling across the sky. Time seemed to slow down like honey dripping from a spoon. She could see Joseph's muscles getting ready to jump, could hear her own heartbeat drumming in her ears louder than war drums. "Wait!" she shouted, stepping between them. "You don't understand." "Understand what?" Carver kept his gun pointed at Joseph, but turned his mean eyes toward her. Miriam's mind raced faster than a spooked horse. She thought about the oak tree where she had almost died, about Joseph's gentle hands caring for her babies, about the way he looked at her like she was worth something. She thought about Elder Stoltzfus calling her twins a curse, about neighbors who had turned their backs when she needed help most. "He is their father," she said, the words coming out strong and clear. "Joseph Two Hawks is my husband by Indian law." The lie tasted strange on her tongue, but it didn't feel like lying. It felt like telling a truth that hadn't happened yet but wanted to. Joseph's eyes went wide with surprise, but he didn't say anything to give her away. The young soldier named Henderson looked confused. 2 of the other men started whispering to each other, like old women at a quilting circle. Carver lowered his gun but kept it ready. "You're telling me you married this savage? Had his half-breed babies?" "The babies are mine," Miriam said firmly. "And yes, I married him. He treats me better than any white man ever did." Private Henderson cleared his throat. "Sir, if she married him legal-like by Indian custom, then maybe we should—" "Should what?" Carver snapped. Let a white woman throw away her race for some feathered fool who will scalp her the minute she's not useful anymore? Joseph finally spoke, his voice calm as still water. I would die before hurting her or the children. This I swear on my father's grave. The twins had stopped crying and were looking around with big eyes, like they knew something important was happening but couldn't understand what. Hope grabbed a fistful of Miriam's dress, and Faith reached toward Joseph like she wanted him to hold her. Carver saw the baby reaching for the Indian, and his face got even redder. You've corrupted these children beyond saving. But I'll tell you what. He pointed his gun at the ground, but kept his finger on the trigger. You get out of Nebraska territory and never come back. Take your Indian husband and your half-breed bastards and disappear. If I see any of you again, I'll hang you all from the nearest tree. Miriam felt Joseph's hand touch her shoulder, warm and steady, like a rock in rushing water. She looked at the soldiers, at their blue uniforms and hard faces, and realized she had made her choice without even knowing it. We'll go, she said, but not because we're afraid of you, because we choose to. Carver put his gun away, but his eyes promised trouble if their paths ever crossed again. Joseph's knife flashed silver in the afternoon sun as Lieutenant Carver stumbled backward, clutching his wounded arm. The other soldiers raised their rifles, but something unexpected happened. Miriam stepped directly between the guns and Joseph, her babies pressed against her chest like shields made of innocence. Stop! Her voice carried across the prairie with surprising power. Before you shoot an unarmed woman, listen to what I have to say. Carver's face twisted with pain and rage. Get out of the way, girl. This savage attacked an officer of the United States Army. This man saved my life when my own people left me to die. Miriam's hands trembled, but her voice grew steadier. You want to know the truth about these babies? Their father was an Amish boy who ran away when he learned I was carrying twins. My church elders said God cursed me for my sin. The soldiers exchanged glances. Everyone knew the Amish were good Christian folk. If they had cast out this woman, she must have done something terrible. Joseph found me 3 days after my daughters were born, Miriam continued. I was dying of fever and bleeding. He brought me water and medicine. He built a shelter. He never touched me except to help. She looked directly at Carver. By white man's law, a woman can choose her own husband. By Indian law, a man who saves a life becomes responsible for it. What happened next surprised everyone, including Miriam herself. Joseph stepped beside her and spoke in careful English. In my tribe, when a man protects a woman and her children, and she accepts his protection, they become family. Miriam Yoder is now Miriam Two Hawks. These children are my daughters by choice, not by blood. Carver spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. You're both crazy if you think I believe that nonsense. Believe what you want, Miriam said, but ask yourself this. Why would an Amish woman lie to protect an Indian? What could I possibly gain? The lieutenant studied her face, searching for deception. What he saw instead was something he didn't understand, a woman who had found her backbone in the middle of nowhere, defending a man who owed her nothing. You got papers proving this marriage? Carver demanded. Joseph reached slowly into his medicine bag and pulled out a small object wrapped in soft leather. Inside was a silver thimble, tarnished but still shining. This belonged to my first wife, he said. I gave it to Miriam yesterday. Among my people, when a woman accepts such a gift, she accepts the man. Miriam held up her hand, showing the thimble on her finger like a wedding ring. I wear it freely. The standoff stretched like a bowstring ready to snap. Wind rustled through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song. One of the younger soldiers shifted nervously in his saddle. Finally, Carver lowered his weapon. This ain't over, he growled. You two freaks deserve each other. But if I see either of you in Nebraska territory again, I'll shoot first and ask questions later. As the soldiers rode away in a cloud of dust, Joseph turned to Miriam with wonder in his dark eyes. Why did you claim me as husband? Miriam looked down at the silver thimble, then at her daughters sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around them. Because, she said softly, you're the only man who ever saw my children as blessings instead of burdens. Snow fell like tiny white flowers on the morning of Miriam's first winter in the Lakota camp, each flake landing silently on the buffalo hide walls of her teepee. Inside, warmth wrapped around her like a grandmother's quilt as she watched Joseph carve a wooden toy for hope and faith. now 8 months old and crawling everywhere with the curiosity of baby bears. "Tell me again about the day you found us," she asked, settling beside him with mending in her hands. Joseph smiled, his weathered fingers never pausing in their work. "I was hunting deer near the white settlement when I heard crying." But it wasn't deer crying, it was something smaller and sadder. He held up the half-finished toy, a small horse with a flowing mane. "I thought maybe it was a lost colt, but when I got closer, I saw a woman under a tree with 2 tiny babies." Faith crawled over and pulled herself up using Joseph's knee, babbling in the mixed language she had invented, part German, part English, part Lakota. Hope followed her sister, and soon both girls were climbing on the man they had learned to call Papa Joe. "The other women think I'm strange for keeping their Amish names," Miriam said, stitching a tear in Joseph's winter shirt. "Names are just sounds," Joseph replied, lifting both babies onto his lap. "What matters is the love behind them. Besides," he grinned, "Hope and Faith fit them perfectly. Hope because you never gave up, even when you were dying. Faith because you trusted a stranger to help you." Outside their tipi, the sounds of camp life continued, children playing in the snow, women calling to each other, old men telling stories around fires. Miriam had worried she would never fit in, but the Lakota grandmothers had adopted her quickly, teaching her to work with beads and buffalo hide, showing her which plants made the best medicine. "Do you ever regret leaving your people?" Joseph asked quietly. Miriam considered this as she watched her daughters play. "I regret that they couldn't see past their fear to love these little ones. But leaving? No." She reached over and touched his hand. "You gave us more than shelter, Joseph. You gave us a chance to become who we were meant to be." A commotion outside interrupted their quiet moment. Voices rose in excitement, and Joseph stepped out to investigate. When he returned, his face was serious but not worried. "Traders have come from Fort Robinson," he said. "They bring news from the white settlements. There's been trouble, soldiers fighting with other tribes. The army is moving more men into the territory." Miriam felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. "Will we have to move?" "Perhaps, but not today." Joseph knelt beside her and took her hands. "Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what families do." Hope chose that moment to take her first wobbly steps, letting go of the wooden toy and walking 3 steps before falling down with a giggle. Faith clapped her hands in delight, and soon both babies were attempting to walk, filling the tipi with laughter. As Miriam watched her daughters discover their own strength, she thought about journeys, how some begin with endings, and how the hardest paths sometimes lead to the most beautiful destinations. Outside, snow continued to fall on the endless prairie, covering old tracks and making the world clean and new. In the distance, a wolf howled, its voice carrying across the frozen grassland like a song of survival. Miriam smiled, understanding now that she had found her pack, not the one she was born into, but the one she had chosen, and who had chosen her in return. The babies crawled back to their parents, and the little family sat together by their fire, safe and warm and complete, while winter sang its ancient lullaby across the land of the free.